any dragon type attacks or maybe provide more of a like defensive, okay, I can use Dazzling Gleam and connect an attack with both Pokemon, deal some chip damage. But, you know, Sylveon's always been a really interesting pick, in my opinion, from past metagames because it gets access to the ability Pixelate. And what that does is it turns normal type moves into fairy type moves and also gives them a bit of a damage boost alongside of that. You know, in terms of how we've seen Sylveon played so far in the 2020 format, a lot of people will run it with the held item Throat Spray, so you can use Hyper Voice, which is a normal type attack that gets turned into a fairy type attack, will hit both opponents, and then also give you a special attack boost after the attack has concluded, which is something that you really have to watch out for. You know, I think Eduardo certainly has a Pokemon in the form of that Durant that can stop Sylveon, but that's going to be an interesting thing to keep in the back of his mind as we go into this Game 1.
Game 1, here are the leads. Eduardo is going to be bringing that Arcanine as well as the Durant, and Daiki is going to have the Rotom and the Dusclops. So looks like we have a pretty good setup here for a potential Trick Room, depending on how the Pokemon that are in the back for Daiki are trained.
And that's interesting that Daiki went for the Trick Room so early on in this matchup, because if you look at his team on paper, there aren't a lot of Pokemon that you would associate with a normal Trick Room team. You know, Excadrill normally has Sand Rush, so Sand is up on the field, it's very fast. Togekiss, Rotom, Wash aren't really Pokemon that you'd expect to necessarily excel in Trick Room, but I think given the fact that Eduardo led with the Durant, and given the fact that Durant revealed Life Orb during the Frisk from that Dusclops, I think it's going to be a very offensive presence, and Trick Room is something that Daiki might be looking to use to try and, you know, just slow it down and maybe stop it from Dynamaxing.
Well, Eduardo's going to want to do a bit of repositioning here just because that Durant's not going to be entirely safe in this situation. And maybe wants to save it for when there's a bit more of an opportunity to really let that Durant shine. But Daiki, in this case, is going to have the opportunity to get that Rotom to use a Nasty Plot, and the Trick Room does go off without a hitch.
I like the switch-in of the Togekiss here from Eduardo. I don't think he had much on his team other than the Gourgeist, which I'm assuming he didn't bring to this match to stop the Trick Room. So by sending Togekiss out onto the field, he can at least redirect any attacks that this Rotom would fire at the Arcanine to itself. That being said, Rotom with +1 attack, or special attack, is going to do a ton of damage to that Togekiss if it goes for one of those electric type attacks. So it's going to be up to Eduardo to try and predict which Pokemon that Daiki is going to target with his Rotom. Whereas the Dusclops is definitely a safer spot on the field. Does get access to something like Nightshade if he wants to do 50 health points worth of damage. That is based off the level of the Pokemon at this point in time. But still, just Daiki is free to go on the offensive here with that Rotom, and I think Eduardo really needs to figure out how he's going to power through it.
Well, part of powering through it might actually be putting in that Gastrodon, because Gastrodon does sometimes get the access to the Storm Drain ability, which can redirect some of those single-targeted water-type attacks. But the Nightshade is going to be the first of those moves going into the Gastrodon slot, and there's going to be the Max Geyser, and there's that Storm Drain.
That was a really great prediction there for Eduardo. If you think about it, knowing he has the Gastrodon in the back, Ground-type wouldn't take damage from Max Lightning. Storm Drain don't take damage from the Max Geyser. And gives Arcanine an opportunity to go for a Snarl as well. So Nasty Plot has been completely eliminated from the field, and Gastrodon will have an opportunity to start maybe punishing that Dusclops for just sitting on the field, doing relatively nothing.
Well, Rotom Wash could go for some other types of moves as well. Does have access to potential Max Lightning, maybe even something else. We have no idea what else is tucked onto this particular Rotom, so we'd have to kind of wait and see. But yeah, at least we know that we can't use Max Geyser in this instance because that Storm Drain's going to make sure it gets completely nullified.
Yeah, and I wonder if the Arcanine on Eduardo's side of the field is bulky enough to take a Max Lightning or two from this Rotom. It seems like it's pretty content right now to keep firing off those Snarls, and I'm curious how Daiki's going to try and power through that.
One of these ways that Daiki might actually just be changing some of the position of the board is going to be bringing out that Tyranitar, which with the Sandstream is going to change the weather. But the Scald into the Rotom, trying to get the burn, does indeed get the burn, and that's going to help with this Max Darkness that's now coming out.
Yeah, I like the fact that a lot of Rotom who are running Nasty Plot also have been running Dark Pulse. for situations like this, because being able to drop the special defensive Pokemon on the opposing side of the field is another way that you can sort of offset
Deal
the
with
fact.
these snarls.
Yeah, that snarl is starting to add up as well.
Special attack drops for both of these Pokemon, for the Tyranitar and the Rotom. That burn, though, is just going to end up doing additional chip damage with the Sandstorm in play, as well as having that burn.
You have to wonder how many turns this Rotom Wash can stick around on the field, knowing that it will be taking residual damage from the burn and from the Sandstorm at this point in time. I think that it probably will stay around a little bit longer to try and pick up the knockout on that Gastrodon, especially since its health is so low, and Gastrodon is really threatening this Rotom from doing what it wants to do, which is connect a Max Geyser or presumably a Hydro Pump against the Arcanine on Eduardo's side of the field. If you're able to remove it from play, that's just one less Pokemon you have to worry about. You know that it's going to be the Durant, the Togekiss, and the Arcanine as Eduardo's last 3 Pokemon, and you know, Tyranitar actually has a decent matchup against the Togekiss, could have a decent matchup against the Durant, provided Trick Room remains up on the field. So Daiki has found his win condition. He just needs to figure out how to pilot towards it.
Part of the piloting, though, that Eduardo has to do is protect this Gastrodon from some potential attacks that are going to be coming out from both of the Pokemon on Daiki's side.
Ooh.
This Rock Slide, though, going to do a massive chunk of damage to the Togekiss there, but the Max Lightning as well. A great read from Daiki is going to go right into the Togekiss, not only setting the terrain, but more importantly, getting that knockout.
And that Rock Slide would have been super effective regardless of what Pokemon was on the field, either the Arcanine or the Togekiss. So doubling up into that spot, calling the Protect on the Gastrodon was just really great positioning from Daiki.
Excellent positioning, absolutely. I mean, even though this Rotom ended up whiffing that first attack that it had in the Dynamax form, it's ended up doing quite a bit of work even still.
It has, and I really like how Daiki's made the best of it. You know, not worrying as much about those snarls, knowing that he had access to Max Darkness to try and off-put that a little bit. Now that the Durant is forced out onto the field, I think we're going to see Eduardo go for the Dynamax finally on his side. When you're running Durant, you have a Pokemon with Hustle as its ability, and you basically trade a power-up in your attacks for a lowering of the attack's accuracy. So when Durant is in its normal non-Dynamax form, that means that all of its attacks, regardless of how accurate they are outside of you know, the Hustle ability, have a chance of missing. But when you Dynamax, your moves no longer have accuracy taken into account. So if you can Dynamax it, and you can connect those, you know, max Steel Spikes against that Tyranitar, or maybe even against the Rotom, given how low its health is, you can really start adding up those KOs. So I like how Eduardo kept the Durant for the end of this game. I think that it's a great win condition to have. He just has to make sure that Daiki doesn't find a way to get Trick Room up again on the field.
Well, I really like that not only has Eduardo preserved this Durant, but has also decided to preserve the Arcanine to get a couple of Intimidates off, but Crunch getting revealed from this Tyranitar right into that slot that the Gastrodon was in, and the Dark Pulse as well, completely reading the fact that this Durant was going to go for a Protect here.
And that is perfectly okay, I think, for Eduardo, because this Arcanine does have access to recovery with that Citrus Berry and will be able to, you know, again, slow down the pace of the game on Daiki's side of the field thanks to the Intimidate and the Snarl. Arcanine, it's okay to be taking that damage with, because you're not looking for it to deal the damage on your side of the field. You're mostly looking for it to protect the Durant, which is going to be the key of Eduardo's strategy as we enter the endgame.
Really close. I'm sitting on the edge of my seat right now because this really could go either way.
It really could, and what I find interesting to me is the fact that Daiki still has that Dusclops in the back, and we don't know what his last Pokemon is. I think that if Daiki finds a way, maybe let the Rotom get knocked out at this point. Just its health is so low, it's burned, there's still sand on the field. It's not going to be able to stick around for too much longer, and can get the Dusclops out onto the field. And then, provided he can survive an attack from, you know, the Durant, assuming Dynamax, and then I guess the Gastrodon now, and get Trick Room back up on the field, I think that Daiki would be able to find a way to stop this Durant. But again, Durant is just so powerful, and the combination of Hustle and the Dynamax moves are really going to make it tough for that Dusclops to sort of hold on and, again, get speed control back in Daiki's favor.
might make it tough for any of the Pokemon on Daiki's side of the field to actually hold on, because that Durant is going to be Dynamaxed and larger than life. Tyranitar going for the Protect just in case that Durant decided to target it down, but the Max Steel Spike is going to be the very first move, and it will be right into the Tyranitar. That Protect being so valuable to ensure that Tyranitar can actually get a chance to make a turn.
I'm curious to see as well. There we go.
Because there's the weakness policy.
You have to wonder when you see a Tyranitar Protect in front of what would be a super effective max move, if there is going to be a weakness policy following close behind.
Oh, and the Gastrodon able to hang on. This Rotom has just been really, kind of getting as much of its money's worth as it can out of the turns that it's been on this field, but
1 HP is all you need to stay on the field for one more turn, and I think that was what Daiki might have been looking for there, because, I keep talking about the opportunity to get Dusclops back out onto the field, the opportunity to go for another Trick Room, but really, the longer that Rotom stays on the field, the longer that the less Dynamax that this Dusclops will have to contend with when it does eventually make a reappearance. And you have to wonder if whatever Pokemon is last in Daiki's party, that he brought for this match, if it would benefit from that Trick Room, if it would benefit from the fact that Durant doesn't have Dynamax, then this is a perfectly favorable position for him. It's an interesting thing to call out, because when you think of someone being on the offensive, you think that they're, dealing as much damage as possible. They're making sure to manage the board state as best as they can. But in this case, I think it's just enough that Daiki's hanging in there, because he knows that he has the potential for a big play in a future turn, and he just has to find it.
Well, Tyranitar's not going to be the one that's going to be making those big turns, because that's going to be the second Max Steel Spike that it takes, and with no Protect this time, it is going to be felled to it. But now there's the Dark Pulse right into the protected Gastrodon, and the Sandstorm just barely subsiding in time for this Rotom to get knocked out by the burn.
That's all right. I think Rotom did a really good job this match, sticking around a lot longer than any of us were expecting, bringing that Gastrodon down to just the last sliver of its health. And this is what I was somewhat worried about, the fact that it's Sylveon that is the last Pokemon that Daiki has on his party. To Daiki's advantage, Sylveon does get access to a move called Magical Fire, which, if given the opportunity to attack that Durant, would certainly knock it out, regardless if it's Dynamax or not. Durant is very, very weak to fire, and that's going to be an easy KO for the Sylveon. But he needs to find that opening. So hypothetically, a Protect plus a Trick Room here, assuming that the Dusclops can survive an attack from the Gastrodon and the Durant, would be that opening. But that is such a large ask. You do have the opportunity of potentially stalling out the remainder of Dynamax this turn, but no Dusclops would be running Protect. Again, you would just be trying to expect your Pokemon to be able to survive 2 turns of attacks from these Pokemon on Eduardo's side of the field, and that's just not a reliable strategy. So if you're able to use Ally Switch to disrupt your opponent, that would probably work out much better in your favor.
Oh, well, the Ally Switch is going to at least save the Sylveon for a little while, but it will be a critical hit that it ends up knocking out this Dusclops after the Ally Switch went through. So unfortunately, this is going to be Daiki's last Pokemon, and that Life Orb just doing so much damage, and the recover now as well from Eduardo's Gastrodon is going to make sure that it can stay on this field for a couple more turns. We'll see if it has carrying that Mystical Fire, and yes it is, but it's going right into the Gastrodon, not the Durant.
That is interesting. I can see why you would want to drop the special attack of the Gastrodon eventually. It's possible that Daiki was expecting a Protect or a Max Guard from that Durant, so that, targeting the Gastrodon, getting the special attack drop would have been your way around that. That is not what happened, and the fact that Daiki locked in the forfeit there, I think, confirms that he knows what's going to happen for the rest of that game. So I like that the Sylveon did have the tools it needed in order to pick up the potential KO on the Durant. That's certainly something that Eduardo is going to have to keep in mind going into Game 2.
Absolutely.
But still, he just was able to completely maintain his board positioning, keep the Durant safe until Trick Room ran out, and then just otherwise pilot through Daiki's team really, really well.
This was an incredibly close game one, though. We weren't even sure whether or not that, kind of who was going to be able to take it, right? Like, I think that for a long time there, especially in the mid game, it really looked as though we were going to kind of have an undecisive victory between people. So I think that's a really strong show of kind of how well these players have actually trained and prepared for these matches. And I'm super excited to see how this game 2 is going to go.
I'm excited as well. You have to look at Daiki's strategy into that game and try to guess how he would adjust. I think he really wanted to rely on the Trick Room and that Rotom Wash to deal the big damage needed to sort of power through Eduardo's team, but because Eduardo brought the Gastrodon, and I think the Gastrodon is actually a really strong pick against Daiki's team overall, that Rotom Wash was not able to find an opening. Maybe if it had gotten the nasty plot off without those snarls on the Arcanine, a Dark Pulse or a Max Darkness would have been enough to remove the Gastrodon from the field, but overall, the pairing of the Arcanine, the Gastrodon, the Durant just gave Eduardo the room he needed to, again, stall out those Trick Room turns, lower the Rotom Wash's attack so that the Lasty plot was no longer a concern, and just otherwise pilot through Daiki's team. I think if we're talking about adjustments, I think what I want to see from Daiki this game is a more offensive approach. He does have access to the Tyranitar and the Excadrill. It's very possible that the combination of enough ground type moves or maybe even a Rock Slide or two would be enough to deal damage to that Durant to pick up the KO. That would be something that would really benefit his team and wouldn't rely on the Trick Room at all, which I just don't think the Dusclops was really pulling its weight that game. Like, when I look at his team and when I look at what happened in that past game, it all comes back to the Dusclops. Yes, it has Nightshade, it can deal consistent damage, but I don't think Daiki needs consistency. I think he needs big plays to match what Eduardo's bringing.
Well, I really like this adjustment from Eduardo, potentially bringing in the Gourgeist instead of having the Durant out front because of the leads that Daiki was going for at the very beginning. But this is very interesting because now this Gourgeist does have that trick-or-treat ability, and you do have that Dusclops on the field here for Daiki.
And that's an interesting adjustment from Eduardo as well. I would think that if he was comfortable with how he played game one, he wouldn't have brought the Gourgeist. And Gourgeist feels like a very I want to stop your Trick Room adjustment from Eduardo. I mean, to Gourgeist's advantage, it can also deal some nice grass-type damage to that Rotom W, and that might be something that Eduardo is looking for as well. But Eduardo might be trying to say, I understand you were relying a lot on Dusclops last game. I see the threat of Trick Room, and in order to stop that threat, I'm going to bring my own Trick Room user and just maintain that presence on the field so that your Dusclops just has even less things it can do. Yes, you may be able to ally switch, but I know that's coming. I know that I can weather that damage, and I can just, again, power through.
I would be very curious to ask why this Gourgeist is here in this particular game, but look at that. There was a little bit of a void here, and really missing kind of the big target that it really wanted to hit with that Snarl.
But no Nasty Plot before the Dynamax, and no Gastrodon switching as well here. So that Arcanine is just going to be knocked out by Max Geyser, finally.
Yeah, that Max Geyser is exactly what Daiki really wanted to be able to get off, especially when it was Arcanine on the receiving end of that. But Gourgeist going for the Will-O-Wisp, and a second avoided attack. That Nightshade now into the Gourgeist.
Yeah, so overall a much better start of the game for Daiki, even though he brought the same two Pokemon and presumably hasn't made any major adjustments to his strategy between game 1 and game 2. Knowing that Gourgeist was not on the field for Eduardo last turn, I think it's very, very possible that his adjustment was to leave that Gastrodon behind, which I think is a mistake in this case. I think if a Snarl had landed, if the Will-O-Wisp had landed, we might be talking about a different board position, a different game, but unfortunately, because of those misses, this Rotom is really unchallenged right now, and this Rotom is going to be free to go for those big attacks into the Togekiss, potentially even into the Gourgeist with the Max Darkness, which we know it has. I'm curious to see how Eduardo is going to find his way out of this, because as far as we know his team, we saw the Will-O-Wisp from Gourgeist. I'm assuming it has Trick Room, but we don't know much else about it, and it's possible that this Gourgeist is going to fall to a similar fate that the Dusclops did for Daiki in the previous game, where it's just not going to be able to land those Will-O-Wisps or really accomplish anything before Daiki is able to take too much of an advantage.
Well, Daiki's at a bit of an advantage right now, but this is Eduardo kind of getting a chance to match this with a Dynamax of their own, really paying attention to the turns that Daiki is trying to get a hold of with the Dynamax for the Rotom Wash, but this Togekiss now is going to be able to match that and going for the Max Guard, potentially trying to bait out some type of attack like that Max Lightning coming out for the Rotom Wash. What a great heads-up play from Eduardo, and now gets a chance to use the Seed Bomb in return, which is going to get a chance to hit for super effective damage. Nightshade again into the Gourgeist. We saw how little it did last time, but it does bring it to about half. That's about a quarter damage each turn.
I wonder if the Rotom is within KO range for something from Togekiss to pick up potentially a critical hit and then pick up the knockout, because that's really the only situation I could see being beneficial for a Max Guard there from Eduardo. I think his win condition right now is either stall out or otherwise knock out this Rotom before it's able to pick up the KO onto the Togekiss. And yes, the Gourgeist with the Seed Bombs will certainly help put Rotom within range of a KO, but if this Togekiss isn't able to, pick up that knockout or otherwise avoid taking a Max Lightning from this Rotom, it's going to be a really tough spot for Eduardo to come back from.
Well, Max Darkness first. Gourgeist's not going to be able to fire off another Seed Bomb because it is going to get knocked out by the Darkness. And more importantly, if you're going to get the special defense drop onto the Togekiss, so it's going to make it pretty frail if it gets a chance to be hit by something else. But a Max Starfall right at the Dusclops instead.
Oh, that's interesting.
Yeah.
It's interesting, especially because
They get the critical hit though.
Yeah, the Dusclops again. It is accomplishing a lot by sitting on the field at this point and definitely threatening the use of a Trick Room, as we do see revealed right now. But the turn order was just revealed for the Rotom versus this Togekiss. We saw that the Rotom was faster than the Togekiss. So as of right now, Eduardo's in a decent position, again, for this Togekiss to try and pick up the KO onto the Rotom. We do know the Dusclops has access to something like Ally Switcher and Nightshade, but neither of those are really going to be a move that knocks out. And then that'll give Durant the opportunity to go on the offensive. The Durant doesn't have access to Dynamax at this point in time, so Eduardo will be rolling the dice, so to speak, in terms of the accuracy of his moves. But I really think the Trick Room that Daiki set up in that turn currently benefits Eduardo just a little bit more. That being said, Daiki still has 2 Pokemon in the back, and we have no idea what those Pokemon are. It's very, very likely that Sylveon is going to be making an appearance, given how Game 1 played out and how that Sylveon was revealed to carry Mystical Fire. And if that Sylveon is present and can go for that attack, we'll be looking at a Game 3.
Max Starfall again. Right back into the Dusclops. Dusclops, even though it was able to move first, that was going to be the last attack it's capable of getting off in this game too, because it is going to get knocked out, and that is going to give Daiki a bit of an ability to get a free switch in, but that was a lot of damage coming out from the Thunderbolt right into the Max Togekiss. But interesting that Durant is going to go ahead and go for a little bit of chip damage there.
I don't think Durant had a better attacking move, to be quite honest with you. I know that some Durant like to run Rock Slide, not Max Rock Ball, to try and stop opposing Pokemon like Charizard, for example. But in this case, given the fact that we saw the Durant go for an Iron Head, it's possible that Eduardo has opted in to run some coverage-type moves that otherwise would not have been able to connect with that Rotom. So it's always nice to get a little bit of chip damage there. I think the fact that Sylveon is going to be on the field will really seal this victory for Daiki, unless this Togekiss is able to find a critical hit and deal, again, some big damage to give himself an opening.
Hyper Voice.
Yeah, no.
There it is. Togekiss going to get knocked out, and this is going to be Daiki expertly maneuvering this Game 2 situation in order to bring us to a Game 3.
Yeah, and I really do love how Daiki adjusted his strategy compared to Game 1. You look at Dusclops, you look at the timing of Trick Room. In Game 1, Daiki went immediately for Trick Room. He went for the Nasty Plot on the Rotom, but because the Arcanine was still present on the field, it just wasn't able to really capitalize on it. This time around, Daiki did not Dynamax the Rotom immediately. He did not go for the Trick Room immediately. Instead, he made sure to remove the Arcanine from the field and then started to run Trick Room, and then, you know, relied on that Sylveon for massive damage to pick up those game-winning KOs there. Looking at Eduardo's side of the field, it's possible if he had brought Gastrodon instead of the Gourgeist, he could have stopped that. You know, the being able to redirect the Max Geyser would have certainly helped that Arcanine stick around for a couple turns. It did so much damage. But given the fact that the Rotom does have Life Orb, it's going to be dealing those, you know, big hits no matter what. I think that Eduardo really needs to try and go back to what he did in game 1, get those snarls down, you know, maybe leave the Gourgeist behind. It's always admirable to try and stop a Trick Room team with a Trick Room of your own, but in this case, I think that the Gourgeist just wasn't really able to do much else, and unfortunately that just added up over the course of that game.
I wonder whether Daiki even wants to go for the Trick Room at this point, or if it's just threatening the Dusclops because there's not really a better option at this moment to kind of go for any sort of other support options.
It's a good question to ask, and I think you have to look at Daiki's team composition in order to answer it. With Excadrill, Tyranitar, Rotom-Wash, and Togekiss, again, those aren't really Trick Room Pokemon. I think we've seen Daiki rely on Trick Room a lot, mostly because the Pokemon that Eduardo has been basing his strategy around. In this case, I think it's the Duran. Is a very fast Pokemon. You want to be able to outspeed it, and because Daiki's only form of speed control, barring a potential, you know, max airstream on that Togekiss, is going to be the Trick Room. By making sure you have it on the field and making sure that you go for the big attacks with that Sylveon when it does have the speed advantage, you set yourself up for a win eventually. You know, going earlier on into that game 1, I think Daiki was fishing for that board state and he just wasn't able to find it. Again, because of that Arcanine, because of the Gastrodon, and Eduardo needs to apply that pressure if he wants to be able to, you know, find a way to win this game 3. Like, those two games were very close, which is interesting because they didn't really feel like they were close, but it was just a couple of key turns that really differentiated the outcomes.
Yeah, there were definitely some key turns there, and I think one of those was actually forcing Eduardo into a situation where they had to Dynamax the Togekiss.
Yes.
That was definitely a pivotal moment there for Daiki where they got a chance to get maximum value from their Rotom-Wash.
Yeah, and you have to wonder if that was part of Eduardo's plan going into that game because, again, Durant is a Pokemon that you do not like to run without access to Dynamax. Durant was in the back of Eduardo's party. Maybe Eduardo just wasn't anticipating Dynamaxing the Togekiss in that game, and as a result, that also caught him off guard.
Yeah. Well, again, we're seeing an adjustment. Eduardo this time bringing Arcanine and Tyranitar, and Daiki leading with the same leads we've seen many, many times now. It's going to be the Dusclops and that Rotom-Wash.
So Tyranitar, another adjustment here from Eduardo. Definitely more optimal than the Gourgeist compared to game 2, but I really want to see that Gastrodon in the back of Eduardo's party come in onto the field for him. I think it's great that he got Sandstorm set up himself. You know, being able to deal that little bit of chip damage to the Rotom-Wash is really going to add up, as we saw in previous games. But he needs to be able to, you know, take away the Max Geyser and just find a way to stop that Rotom from attacking as much as it wants to, because otherwise we're going to see it play out in game 2 where one Max Geyser connecting with the Arcanine is all Daiki really needs to take a huge advantage early on.
Early Dynamax again, Rotom-Wash getting the big washing machine on the board for Daiki. This is now 2 games in a row where Daiki has recognized that this is the perfect opportunity to go for the Dynamax and get it out early. But Eduardo is also recognizing this is a perfect time to match that. So I'm going to use a Dynamax of my own, and we are going to see a larger-than-life Tyranitar on the field, which not only is going to be able to get a chance to take advantage of the Sandstorm, but it is going to get that double health pool, which is going to help it survive any sort of attack that is going to come out from that Rotom-Wash.
And we saw the Dusclops Frisk reveal the weakness policy on it as well, and that's something that Daiki has to be very careful about.
Well, Max Geyser is going to be targeting down the Arcanine again. A Safeguard not going to be able to help at all against that super effective damage. So Arcanine is going to get knocked out in that turn 1 yet again.
The safeguard, though, might be Eduardo trying to stop a potential Will-O-Wisp from that Dusclops. We don't know much about it right now.
Yeah, we really don't know much at all, but we do know that this Tyranitar is going to be going for the Max Darkness, bringing that Rotom to about half of its health, and also going to get that special defense drops so that we're going to see Attacks of the Future do more damage. And Trick Room, again, this is going to be Daiki's play, using the Trick Room to try to set up for some Pokemon that they have in the back.
But yet again, Eduardo finds himself in a position where his Dynamax Pokemon is actually slower than the opposing Dynamax Pokemon. I like that Eduardo did bring the Gastrodon with him, but you have to wonder if that safeguard is going to pay off or not. We might not never know. I mean, knowing that the safeguard went up before Dusclops or any of the Pokemon on Daiki's side of the field went for something like a Will-O-Wisp, it means we'll potentially never see it. Obviously, if the Dusclops is still around after it expires, it's possible that Daiki might go for it, but a very, very safe play from Eduardo. I think it's an indication that he's really hoping that this Tyranitar with the weakness policy is going to be enough to power through the Rotom Wash, the Dusclops, that Sylveon that you know is probably lurking in the back of Daiki's party.
Well, it's gotta get procced first. And Nightshade is not going to be the way to do it, especially when it's going to be going into the Gastrodon. Gastrodon going for the Scald, trying again to just take some chip damage here, but maybe the Max Rockfall is going to be enough to finish off the Rotom Wash. And yes, there it is.
And also reset the Sandstorm as well for that Tyranitar, which is going to be really important, assuming the Sylveon is the next Pokemon to be revealed from Daiki. But still, I like how the Tyranitar went on the offensive there. I think doubling into the Rotom Wash is a very good play for Eduardo there because, again, the Dusclops is only going to be going for these Nightshades. It's always going to be doing 50 health points worth of damage. That is the absolute maximum it can do no matter what happens. And that's a very consistent thing you can plan for. We know the Gastrodon does have potential access to recovery. It can easily shrug those Nightshades off. And as long as the Tyranitar on Eduardo's side of the field can continue to attack and can force Daiki to avoid activating the weakness policy, which I think is super, super important here, Eduardo's going to find himself in a really good position. Unfortunately for Eduardo, the Tyranitar on Daiki's side of the field will resist a lot of its attacks, but knowing that those are going to be those max moves as opposed to the normal moves, it's possible that enough damage will be done that the Gastrodon can easily pick up the KO with something like another Scald. So still, I love Eduardo's board position here. I think that Dynamaxing the Tyranitar was a really good decision, and maybe just leaving the Durant at home. Durant is such a powerful Pokemon. You know, you cannot take it, you cannot underestimate it because it will just sweep your team. But in situations like this where your opponent does have access to fire-type moves, it's not usually the best pick.
Well, Gourgeist will show Frisk, and here's going to be something very interesting. A Bulldoze, which is going to be very bold from Daiki's side, is going to proc its own Tyranitar's weakness policy, but you got to be really, really concerned because
it will eventually.
Also, once all the animations go through, also proc the weakness policy for Eduardo's Tyranitar, which is larger than life right now.
And it's good thing to know that Daiki's Tyranitar is apparently slower. Obviously, that could be different, but knowing that Daiki's strategy is preferring Trick Room, it's probably not trained in its speed.
Oh,
but
my
that
goodness.
Max Knuckle is huge. Knowing that Tyranitar is bringing a fighting-type move for this exact setup, you know, I don't even think the weakness policy activation really mattered. That would have been a knockout regardless. Max Knuckle is huge, and now because of the attack boost as well, this Tyranitar is just going to be so scary for Daiki to deal with.
Yeah, especially when the last two Pokemon for Daiki are going to be that Dusclops as well as the Sylveon. And even though the Dynamax is over, it's still a Tyranitar that is sitting at basically full health except for the chip from the Bulldoze, and it has that weakness policy boost.
Yeah, so this is going to be a really key turn here in terms of speeds. It's very, very possible that the Tyranitar on Eduardo's side of the field is slower than this Sylveon, but if it's not, the Sylveon will be able to attack it, easily pick up a knockout with one of those fairy-type moves. I mean, it was just dealing so much damage in previous games. you can't even stall out Trick Room at this point in time if you're Eduardo as well, because there's 2 turns left. You would need 2 protects in order to stall out that turn. So you can pick up a protect on the Tyranitar here, but you would have to either, you know, do the 30% chance of the protect activating a second time in the next turn, or you would just have to go on the offensive and hope for the best. And it looks like Eduardo is hoping that the Tyranitar is slower. Oh, and it is!
Oh, but it gets the avoid!
Oh, no! I mean, there's still an opportunity for a flinch here, but
Tyranitar avoids the Hyper Beam!
What a crazy, crazy play.
These last few turns have been absolutely insane.
Absolutely insane. And because Tyranitar is going to be slower than the Sylveon, it is going to have to attack this turn. It's going to have to try and target it down, pick up the KO. We saw Rock Slide just barely miss the amount of damage needed. Will it get it now is the big question.
And it does.
All right.
No, it's barely going to hang on.
And Hyper Beam will connect, but if Gastrodon is able to connect and attack with that Sylveon, it should be able to knock it out. And I would imagine that the Gastrodon would be able to out-damage this Dusclops to wrap up the game for Eduardo, but this is going to be so close.
Wow, the Earth Power is going to be enough to get the final bit of damage on a Sylveon. But it comes down to Gastrodon versus this Dusclops, which is going to get knocked out by the Sandstorm. Eduardo Cunha taking the series.